Hello, everyone, and welcome to Being Messianic. This is where we look at the Hebrew roots of our faith. And we have been going through some really interesting times recently. We've been looking at the mathematics of who Jesus is, if he's the Messiah. We've been looking at a lot of different things. And today we are actually looking at science itself and looking about this. So as we think about this, we also know there's several powerful scriptures that speak to the idea that there are hidden truths that are revealed in the end times. And there's a gap between the revealed world and the secret world, or what we call the Sod. The first one is in Daniel 12:4. And it's called the sealed prophecy. And in the Hebrew Bible, it is the most direct reference to the end time revelations, where he says, "But you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase their knowledge." So it suggests that there's certain spiritual truths that are intentionally locked away or made incomprehensible because the world wasn't ready for them. We just didn't have that where we were ready for them. And there's a time in the end where the seals are removed and the knowledge, both scientific and spiritual, begins to accelerate. And that's what we're seeing. We also have in Luke 8:17, and Jesus echoes this: "For nothing is secret that not be revealed, nor anything hidden that will not be known and come to light." While it's often used to a moral warning, which it is, that secret deeds will be known, a lot of people see it as suggesting that the secret place will eventually become revealed to everyone. And then in Habakkuk 2:14 and Isaiah 11:9, we know that it is when we're hearing, "For the earth will be filled with knowledge, and the glory of the Lord as the water covers the sea." So we know that there's more coming. One of the things we're going to be looking at is the Jewish perspective. We're going to be focusing on that, and we are looking at Kabbalah or Kabbalah, depending on, you can say it different ways. But it is the 6th century is when it really started taking effect, and it was looking at the gates of wisdom. I've mentioned it before, and the fact that there is a story about 4 rabbis that go into a cave. For many people, it has been something that has been forbidden to look at unless you are at a certain level. You have to have the foundation, the roots. You have to have those in order to go into it. I've also mentioned that, for example, even the Song of Solomon, unless you're a certain age or maturity, you're not allowed to study it because it could be misunderstood. And that's what this is. One of the warnings I'm going to start off at the front of this, a couple of the warnings, is that one, you may not agree with all of that, and that's fine. This is the belief. We're looking at the belief, and we're looking at science. The other thing is you always have to be very careful with this because there's been a lot of people that have gone into it too soon or incorrectly. And, for example, I think many people might remember when there were several Hollywood stars that started getting into, they kept talking about they were Kabbalistic, and that they were getting into it. And they used it to go into a wrong direction, where they were using tarot cards, they were using all sorts of different things. That's not what the root of it is. And that's not where it comes from. So we're looking at the roots. We're looking at the basics. We're not going to get into any of those things, but I did want to bring that up, that if you've heard about it, you may have heard that, oh, it's evil or it's bad. The root of it was not in that way, but it has been misused over time. So that's why we're only going to touch on the surface. We're going to talk about the explanations of it. We're not going into it in deep. So, what is it? The word means received. It's the inner dimension of Jewish practice. It's much like going to the secret place. They consider this the soul of it. It's very hidden. It's, like I said, you have to be advanced in order to get into it. It used to be only the most seasoned rabbis got into it. Now a lot more people are getting into it, and so that's why you hear more about it. So while you think about, we've talked about the Torah is the word, so that is the word, and then you have the Jewish law, and which is the Talmud, which focuses on the revealed part of it. And this is where you get into this. But as Christians, we have a different path. But it's important to understand this is the way they do it. The most common thing you'll hear about is the Zohar. And that's the primary texts that are used. And this is where, like I said, a lot of Hollywood stars and other people got into it and started picking and choosing and creating something different. So just keep that in mind, that is the basics. So in this, the reason it's important is there are different levels and Jewish belief. And the highest level is the sod. The sod level is the very highest. You have the plain, which is the literal meaning of the Word of God. Then you have the allegorical, or like not for us, it's parables. Or you can have more of where people are inquiring, asking questions, and then you have the higher level. And it reminds me of when we have Passover and you have the four children asking the questions. You have the simple child, the evil child, you have the wise child, and you have these different levels of children just exactly that line up with this to tell us about how different people consider these things. So the sod is the highest level, and this is like going to the secret place where you're looking at what is concealed, you're studying it, and we're going to get into a lot more. There's some deeper nuance of area where they believe into, and they do consider this the highest level. So when Jesus told the parable of the sower, we have the same thing where we have the word is coming into the seeds were put on the path, which the information's heard, but it's not retained. It was the rocky ground where there was excitement, but there was no lasting roots. And then you have the thorny ground where it was present, but it was choked out by ego, which would also, when the four children we're talking about, that would be the evil child. And then you have the good soil. And it works the same way where you have these paths and you have the connections. So we literally see the same thing when Jesus was telling this. It was talking about the parable of the sower. The most detailed account is in Matthew 13, verses 1 through 23. You can also find it in Mark 4, 1 through 20, and Luke chapter 8, verse 4 to 15. And what's interesting is where Jesus was telling the story. So in Matthew and Mark, he literally delivers this on a boat, and he's talking to the crowds on the shore. They were so large, he had to row out a bit to get in the Sea of Galilee so everyone could hear him, and it was a natural amphitheater because water, sound carries on water, and they were all able to hear him. So when you look at a sod aspect of this on the parable, it's the Kabbalah, so is where Jesus, immediately after telling the story, when he asked the disciples why he speaks when they ask him why did he speak in parables, he said in Matthew 13:11, "To you it has been given to know the mysteries, the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given." And that's the same thing. He was teaching them. They would have had an idea about the different levels. It didn't really come into effect until after Jesus' death, where they really started studying it more. But there were still the concepts, so they were still there. So what's interesting is if you ever visit the Sea of Galilee, there's a place called the Cove of the Sower, and topographically it matches the story. You can see the beaten paths, the rocky outcrops, the thorny patches, and the fertile fields, all in a single view where Jesus would have been looking at. He would have been seeing all of that. And it's a powerful reminder about tilling the soil, where you're in a garden or wherever, about what we need to do. So it's pretty interesting when you think of it like that. Today, as I said, we've been talking about mathematics and proving Jesus. Today we're looking at science. We're going a different direction. And in the scripture, it says in Genesis 1:3, "Let there be light." What's interesting is the sun wasn't created until fourth day. So what really is that light? And we're looking at the Jewish thought about that. What does that really mean? Because it does come from the Torah. So this is why we look at the infinite light, or Ein Sof. And this isn't about photons, but it's about information, the conscious field that contains all possibilities. So in Kabbalah, what does light mean? So as I said, light, is not just what we see with our eyes, it's a metaphor. They believe it's a metaphor for the divine energy and information. So when you look at the infinite light, before anything was created, there was only the Ein Sof, the endless one. So you have to imagine a light so bright and consistent that it's invisible because there's no shadow to define it. That was the pure potential. That was the pure grace of God. That was God. Then you have the contraction. So when you get into the simsats, the contraction that creates the space for the physical existence, it's like when you have a dark room for developing film, it's when you do something like that, some film that's about to be projected. So without the darkness of our physical world, the light of the divine world would be too overwhelming to perceive. That's part of the belief there. There's also the different filters, and we're going to be talking more about the Sephiroth and looking at those and talking about the tree of light. We'll get into more of that. But first, let's start with science. Why do I starting with science? It just happens that late last year and early this year, there's been some really big scientific breakthroughs, and these actually prove what we're going to be talking about. First is we're looking at quantum, the 0 point field. The physics show that empty space is actually boiling with infinite energy. Matter is just frozen light. And then we know that, so where's the connection in that? We know that that God contracted this infinite energy to create a vacuum space-time where we could exist. That is what the Zohar teaches us. So in quantum physics, what is matter? So quantum physics is the study of building blocks of the universe at the smallest possible level, so the atoms and the subatomic particles. It turns the traditional science upside down, what was believed for a long time, proving that the world isn't solid as it looks like. There's actually more to it. There's a lot more layers to it. And that's also what the Kabbalah also teaches us, is that's where it's teaching us that there's more to this. So in the first one is the wave-particle theory. Light and matter behave like a particle, like it's a solid thing, and the wave of vibrations. And you'll see these cool little vibrations that come off of it. Well, that mirrors the Kabbalistic idea that everything is simultaneously a vessel or particle or a light wave. Then we have the observer effect in quantum physics. One of the most famous rules in quantum physics is that a particle doesn't choose a position until someone looks at it. And I'll explain later about that one. Before it's observed, it exists in a state of all possibilities. We have to observe it, and it's the way we see that. This is the way we're seeing it. And quantum entanglement, this is the spooky fact that two particles can be connected across the universe. What happens to one happens to the others instantaneously. If you look at the Sod connection, it's the scientific version of the oneness of God, proving that everything in the universe is still connected to the same original source. So what we do on earth is done in heaven. There's a bridge. And where these two worlds meet. So again, Kabbalah is the study of the source of light, and quantum physics is a study of the behavior of light as it becomes solid. So one is the source of light, one is the behavior of light. And so today we're looking at how let there be light in Genesis, the exact same event that physicists call the Big Bang. You may or may not agree with it. It's okay. This is where the roots of our faith come from, is coming from all of this. And at how your brain is designed to be the receiver for the cosmic broadcast. So looking at this tells you that you have the infinite, you have all of these different things and how they match up. Fascinating, right? So why is this now? As I said, there's a lot of studies that have come out. It's kind of amazing how many have come out on about light and brain function have come out recently. The first one is the gamma entrapment, and then we have the photobiomodulation and the circadian optimization. We're going to look at each of those a little bit more and why these are important. All of these research were moving beyond using targeted non-drug medical information. And the reason is, like, for example, how do you repair damage to closed head injuries like football players? They were the ones that were studied a lot. Or how can you repair the damage by Alzheimer's or prevent it? This is what we're looking at, is how we do this in medicine and science. So the first one is the gamma entrapment. It's one of the most exciting ones. It involves flickering light at a specific frequency at 40 hertz to stimulate the gamma brain waves. These waves are essential for memory and information processing that are often diminished in patients with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or something like that, where they start, without these waves and these flickerings, they can't remember things. This is why it's so important to look at. So there are recent MIT and UC Berkeley studies that suggest that the light and sound train the brain, triggering a response and your lymphatic system. So that's as the brain's waste clearing plumbing. It's where it gets rid of the waste. Otherwise, it doesn't get rid of it. Then you have the deep brain breakthrough, which was late last year, where the researchers at Technical University of Denmark developed a new light technology that introduces gamma waves without the receiver perceiving the flicker. So you don't actually recognize that it's a flicker, but your brain is recognizing it. And it's making the therapy comfortable for daily use so that they can actually be using it. And the clinical phase 3 trials from last year and early this year have shown 30 to 60 minutes of daily exposure can slow the brain loss volume and improve the cognitive stores in patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's. That's amazing that coming up with light is how we're treating Alzheimer's now. So then we get into transcranial photobiomodulation. And this is using a near-infrared NIR light that actually penetrates the skull to reach the brain tissue. And unlike visible light, it's absorbed by the mitochondria in your neurons, which is a little bit different. So it gives you a mitochondrial boost. The light is absorbed by an enzyme, and this triggers an increase in your ATP, which is where you get your cellular energy. It's the where it has it crosses the synaptic membranes, and it gives the energy. It's a little powerhouse, which helps repair damaged neurons and reduce the neuroinflammation. So the new in 2026. In January, there was a published Journal of Neurotrauma showed the medical grade light therapy helps protect the brains of college football players from the effects of the repetitive head injuries. It was actually helping to heal and to move it forward. We also know that it is working, so ongoing trials right now are seeing it can improve the focus in adults with ADHD and reduce the symptoms in adolescents with autism by activating the prefrontal cortex. It can also be used right now in red light therapy for cognitive recovery for post-stroke modulation. It's looking at the fatty acids metabolism and reducing the oxidative stress. So it's helping to regenerate. So this is one of the studies. There's several big ones coming out this year that have been working on, and they're into different levels of trials. And then we have the blue light neurons. So we've known that the blue light, looking at your laptop or looking at your phone at night is actually bad. However, research in late 2025 refined our understanding of the timing and the contact factors. So this is where we get into the circadian rhythms. And research confirms that the blue light, say at 460 to 480 millihertz, is specifically targeting the specialized cells in your retina. And it signals a master clock in your brain to suppress melatonin. That's why you don't look at it. So you don't want to suppress the melatonin. You want melatonin. And then in 2025, the National Sleep Foundation noted that the content of the light, so you're looking at stimulating social media, is often damaging to the brain function as the light itself. So social media at night is a bad thing. But they also found that the blue turquoise light, which is in the frequency of 450 to 500, is especially in the early morning, is a potential tool that they can use to seasonal affective disorder, SAD, to improve daytime alertness and more effectively than caffeine. So it actually helps more. So it's all of these summaries, these are all these different studies. You see all of these different studies that are helping how we have light in our brain, how light impacts our brain. That's what's been the latest study. So you see the intersection of light, brain function, and consciousness has moved just from this theoretical philosophy into experimental physics and neuroscience that started late last year, but mainly it's early this year. So researchers are now finding evidence that light is not just something that brain perceives, but it's the way that it may use it to generate the conscious self. And the latest research on light and quantum physics process how we shape our consciousness. So it's pretty deep, but there's a lot to it here. So you're seeing how they moved into these different things. So like I said, they're moving into how the brain perceives it, but it is how we think. And the light helps us to how we think and how we focus. So now we're getting into the quantum light hypothesis. It's just a theory, okay? This is a theory, and this is one of the most provocative shifts that has happened in late 2025 and early 26. And it's the experimental validation of orchestrated objective reduction theory. And it was proposed by Sir Roger Penrose and I think it's Stuart Hameroff. And this one, we have the microtubular superradiance. It was a landmark study in the University of Central Florida where they shine visible light into microtubules. These are the structured skeletons in your neurons. And observed that the microtubulars re-emitted this light over hundreds of milliseconds, a time frame long enough to influence the neural processing. Okay, so what that suggests is that the brain may operate as a quantum optical computer. That's what we're looking at now. And then there was an anesthesia connection. So late 2025, early 2025, at Wesley College, researchers found that the stabilizing microtubulars in rats made them more resistant to anesthesia. So like when you're getting the medication during surgery to put you asleep while you're having surgery. This supports the idea that the consciousness isn't just neurons timing, but it's tied to the quantum vibration of the tiny tubulars, which anesthetics turn off. Okay, and this is going to become important. So think about that they're moving and there's the movement. So what's really cool is that research have recently used MRI techniques to detect the quantum entanglement in the living human brain. And it suggests that the unity of consciousness, why you feel you like one person rather than a collection of the separated brain parts, might be due to the quantum particles being locked together across the brain. So how you think about something and how you feel about something and how you perceive things has to do with these quantum particles being locked across the brain. Okay, now we have optogenetics. Well, this one, while the quantum biology looked at how light is in the brain, the optogenetics, how the light the brain uses the light to control it. So this is a huge one that came out this year, and it's one of the bigger ones. But it's precision control. Scientists are now using light-sensitive protons to turn specific neural circuits on and off within a millisecond precision. And this is mapping your seat of being. So it's also about the interventional consciousness. And this is how it jumpstarts your brain. Then we're looking at another finding where it shows how the biophotons, the ultra-weak lights emitted by the cells, are actually giving a non-physical signal. All of this is a lot of deep things, and there's a lot of them, but it's interesting because all of these things come together when you look at it. So there's the binding about how light comes into us, and we need to look at what is light. So we're going to be looking at that, and just so you know, there's also actually last month, there was a huge Science of Consciousness conference where they're talking about more. And so I'm sure there's more that's come out that I have not seen yet. But let's look at Matthew 5:14. You are the light of the world. So Tikkun Olam, you've heard me say this before, it's repairing the world. We are the spark collectors. This is the belief in Jewish belief that every time we act with a higher intention, we release light trapped in little shells. Well, in science, when you're in your garden, you're in your leadership, or your home, or wherever you're doing, your attention, what you focus on, what are you thinking about, is what organizes the chaos into order. So the big things is when the Lord tells us to be doers and we're supposed to go out and do things, we aren't just doing it, we're helping. We're showing the light. We're not hiding our light under a bushel. We're showing God's light when we do that. And the Word of God acts as light. So we have the intersection of light, and the science of biophotonics is a fascinating bridge between, we're looking at the ancient spiritual metaphors and the modern biophysics. Science is proving what we know from Scripture. That's the best part of this. So when we know that in Scripture the Word is light, there are many, you can see the different in Psalms, in John, and Matthew, and you're seeing, if your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be light in Matthew. And then biophotons, you're seeing this too. They say the DNA acts as the primary storage and transmitter. It breathes light into the regulated biology. light is part of our being. That's what science is showing us. It's showing us, and God has already told us that. We see that in the Bible, and we, as we go through it. So as late as the 1970s, we were showing that proved that all living cells emit an ultra-weak photon emissions, which is light. These aren't byproducts of heat; they are coherent laser light signals. We've known that since the 70s. So you have the convergence of all of these topics, and we have. We also know that, and we're going to talk about this, but there is the belief that your body is a temple, and that the biophotons are now we're looking at there could be the physical manifestation of the Shekinah, or the indwelling glory and light. So we're seeing all of these things. What's really fascinating to me is quite some time back, they did some studies with MRIs. And when you are praying or when you're focusing on God, they did it with some others, but mainly there was a lot of also people speaking in tongues. There was a lot of work on that. And you can see how your brain actually changes. Your brain physically changes when you're doing that. So we have to focus on God. Prayer and worship is our key. What's interesting is we know that in the word is a lamp unto my feet in Psalm 119, 105. When we look at the Kabbalistic view, there's the tree of life, and there's the connection to the gamma entrapment. So we can see how all of these things are coming together now, that we have these things coming together. And Scripture 1:1, in the beginning God created. We have the sod background, where we have the contraction, and then we have the new connection of the photobiomodulation, where we can see how these are matching up, how the light is the same thing. They're looking at it slightly differently, but it's meaning the same thing. In John 8:12, Jesus is the light, and through him we are the light of the life. So we're seeing Scripture fulfillment. That's what's so important to us. It is so important that we're seeing the fulfillment now. So in the infinite light theory in Kabbalah, there are 10 levels. And it actually mirrors identical to what the quantum field theory, where there's the how it comes up in that we see the sea of energy that exists in a vacuum. There are 10 levels, and it's interesting that it actually mirrors it. The theory that came out much later, of course, mirrors what the Jewish belief is. So we know that there is the different levels, and each one of these levels has a different meaning. And each level, think about, like I said, about the seeds, where you start out just learning the soil. They may come onto rocky soil, it could come onto a good path, but then as we study the Bible, as we study and try to get closer to God, there are different levels, and we're going to talk about that too. Because when we get into microtubulars, the quantum computers in our brain cells, there's a physical location, and it actually, again, mirrors what this is studying and what we see from the Bible. What's interesting is it mirrors perfectly in science. It mirrors the different levels of what are in the tree of life, and it mirrors that, which, like I said, we can get into that a lot more, but it's a lot to it. But just as wisdom, Hamash, comes from obeying the Lord, so understanding, B'nai, comes from the knowledge of the Holy One. And the word B'nai comes from the Hebrew root between, and implies the ability to distinguish from the real and the unreal and true from the false. So the more you get with God and the more you bring the light in your life, the more you understand. So proper understanding comes from rightly divining the word of truth. We know that from 2 Timothy 2:15, and also that the Scriptures were given the knowledge of the Holy One in 2 Timothy 3:16. So you can see how important it is that we're focusing on the Lord and having the light in our life. What you focus on is very important. So again, I have this all broken down in a comparative view about how you see each one of these. But all of this on the Kabbalistic, all of this is on the Kabbalistic tree of life, and it breaks it down into the different paths and the different vessels. So I have mentioned this when we were talking about the temples, but I didn't go into any detail about it. The tabernacle and the temple were actually set up in the same way, and doing this. So they believed that there was a correlation between light and now we know that photons, which is studied by the quantum physics, is the exact same thing. It's viewed through a different lens. One of the meaning, one is measurement. Well, when they were building the tabernacle and the temple, they wanted to make sure that it was mirroring the tree of life, which has different areas. It has 10 interconnections, and it represents divine and human consciousness in the path of spiritual ascent. So it actually ties together in different levels. The most important thing to know is, as I said, it's in 10, you're looking at different levels of it, and we're going to touch briefly on it. There are three pillars of the tree of life, which is the pillar of mercy, which is expansive and active, and you have the pillar of severity, which is the contractive discipline, and the pillar of equilibrium, which is the balance and harmony. Then there are 22 paths connecting the seraphot, corresponding to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Again, I'm not going to get deep in this because, as I said, there were many people, especially in the early 90s and 2000s, that were taking Kabbalah and using it for other things. They were using it for ritual magic, Torah, meditation. They were using a lot of different things, about the basics to it, and taking it to different areas. So you always have to be careful. And that is why in Judaism that it was forbidden for many people to be able to do it because of this. But let's look at the basics of it. So, when we look at the alignment, we know that when we studied the temple, there was an outer court, and that was the physical world where anybody, is in the far outer court, women and Gentiles could be in. Then you have the holy place where only the priests went, and this is, they believe that this is the emotional and intellectual realm, and this is where the menorah and the showbread, only the priests could go in there. Then you had the Holy of Holies, where you had the ark was in, and only the high priest could go in there, and only once a year, because this was the most sacred. You were going from learning the basics and you're moving your way up. So that's what the tree of life represents, and that's what the whole idea is, that you have to keep going closer to God. What's interesting is also in the tabernacle, you also have all of the furniture, and they believe that those were light transmitters, and they were vessels of divine energy. So you have the menorah, which represents the flash of wisdom and the spread of the light, and the 7 branches are linked to the lower parts of it that govern our emotional world. You have the chobil of showbread, which is the structure that holds the physical substance. This was the blessing that God gave them for food. And then you have the altar of incense, which was in the center, right in the middle of all this, and it represented balance. And then you have the Ark of the Covenant, which I said, only the high priest could go in there, and there was a lot of things to it about you couldn't touch it and things. So this was the Ark of the Covenant is where you have the Holy of Holies. So only the high priest could go there. Heaven is set up. We understand that heaven is set up in the same organizational pattern as what Jewish beliefs are. Now, in the entrance of Solomon's temple, you've also heard me talk about in the past 2 massive bronze pillars, and these also help to form the tree of life. The one on the left was representing structure, the passive vessel that receives the light. And then you have the doorway, which is the middle, which humans find balance between the two. And on the right, you have the pillar of mercy. And this is the expansion, the giving, and the active force of life. So it was a whole structure based upon the tree of life. All right, so now let's get into the quantum. Let's go back to science. So if we look at this through the lens of quantum research, the veil in the temple is the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. In quantum physics, this is what we call the observer threshold. In the Holy of Holies, the ark sat in total darkness or superlight, and this was the quantum vacuum or the wavelength function, where a state where all possibilities exist at the same time before they collapse into the structured reality of the outer rooms. The temple was designed so that a person walked deeper into it. They were literally climbing the tree of life, moving from the physical world of the outside into the simple, unified light of the source, where you're moving into the Holy of Holies. And it's like first studying your scriptures to going to the secret place, moving to a higher level. This is where you're moving up. You have to move up. In Jewish thought, you're moving up into it. For us, it would be first learning scriptures and then moving towards moving towards the secret place and moving to a close relationship with our God and focusing on Him. So you can see there's a lot of lining up with this. As I said, there are 22 alphabets. There are 22 letters of the alphabet, and these are some of the paths on the trees. They also use them as blueprints, and they're considered the connected tissue of the universe. In Kabbalah, they aren't just phonic symbols. They are the vibration or the blueprints of the DNA connection. So we're taught in the Book of Formation that God drew them, hewed them, and combined them, and weighed them, and interchanged them. These are the things that vibrate as you talk, and they vibrate and have the movement that comes from God. Okay, back to science, or in this case, math. The tree of life contains the 10 of the seraphot and 22 paths, one for each of the letters. What's fascinating is each of these, it's a spiritual frequency. What's amazing is when you start looking at these, each of these have a different meaning. All letters in the Hebrew alphabet have a meaning, every one of them. And they also have a numerical number that is attached to them. The temple dimensions match the frequencies and the numbers in the alphabet. So that's what's amazing about this. All of this, God, when He told him how to build the temple and gave him the directions, everything is perfect. Everything matches up. For example, we're going to take the Holy of Holies. It was a perfect cube of cubits. How did they know to do this? God told them. They were actually told how to build it. The number 20 is the value of yod, yod, and when it's spelled out, it has a yod is the seed of all letters. So you can see how it's actually spelled out. So you have the yod, the ve, and the dalet. So that would be, let me get my pointer here, yod, ve, dalet, and it's perfectly spelled out. It's the seed of all letters. It represents the point of singularity from which all light emerges. So now when you look at the quantum vibration, 2026, there was research on cymatics and quantum linguistics, looking at the Hebrew letters. Amazingly enough, they've been doing this. And they found that the Hebrew letters, when they're spoken, their sound frequencies are a visual shape, like in sand or water, that matches the physical shape of the letter itself. They are perfectly aligned. The letters are exactly aligned with what they're saying. The DNA connection. Some research have pointed out that the 22 letters correspond to your 22 amino acids, which are build the proteins in our bodies. In this sense, your body is like a scroll written with 22 chemical letters. So your body is a temple. We know that from scriptures. And it's built like the tree of life. Interesting, huh? Where it's all tied together. So if you look at all these, the 22 paths are highways of consciousness. When you climb a tree, you must master each letter. The transition from the physical word to the heart requires going through specific paths that we have to learn not to focus on our ego, but focus on the Lord. There is a belief that there is a 23rd path. Not everybody agrees to it, and that it could that we could find out about it, that it's a lost letter in the Hebrew alphabet that will come out. I don't know. Not everybody agreed on that one, so I throw it out there as a possibility in case it happens. But again, we can agree to disagree on all of this as well. So let's look at some divine perspective, shall we? In Psalm 94, for 1,000 years in your sight is like yesterday when it's past, and a watch in the night. In 2 Peter 3:8, but beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. So guess what? In quantum theory and quantum physics and Kabbalah, time is not a fundamental thing. It's not a fundamental background. It's like a ticking clock, but it's actually an emergent phenomenon. It's something that's created or perceived rather than something saying it is, which also is interesting because that ties into Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. It ties into that as well. The way God measures time compared to our physical perception is the difference between seeing a finished movie and a character living inside one. So we see it differently. What Einstein did was he took the idea that if you were on a train and you were measuring and counting it, you were looking at time one way. So on train, as you're moving forward, you're seeing it. But if you're on this train station, you see it differently. So think about it like this way. Like if you had a medical emergency and you were calling an ambulance, it seems like I've had people that would say, oh, it took you hours to get here. It took you 30 minutes. And it really didn't. But their perception of time is completely different. It's where you're standing as to what it means. So that's what we have to look at it. So time is different. It's how we look at it. And then we have the secret level, which is the divine perspective. In Kabbalah, those verses aren't about long periods of time. It's looking at the temporal order that exists in the higher spiritual realms. So you have the block universe, where time is a single high definition photograph in the beginning and exists in between. And then you have the watch. So you have it in different, you see, these are all the way you see it in different perspectives is what we're looking at. And then we have all this 2026 research that shows that is true. All of this is coming through that shows that this is exactly the way it is of what it was taught. Amazing when you think about it. God's timing is amazing that we get to see these things. And you see how the quantum measurements actually connect to these. So you have the quantum mechanics and time are actually looking at it. We also have some Stephen Hawking's imaginary time model suggests that if you look far enough back, time behaves differently. So there's all of these theories that are coming forth and all of this new research that's connecting all of this to what is actually in the Bible too. So again, we look at it differently. We look at time in different ways. So while God provides the potential, the block, the humans provide the actualization, how we see it. It's how you see it. And we think about it like this one. We're the ones reading the scroll, but God already wrote it. We know he wrote it. Time is not the same thing for God. And that's what science is also proving as well. So again, you can look at the summary where time measurements, where you have the physical, you have the quantum, you have the divine, and you have the temple view. All of those different things showed science is proving what we had. And we're learning as you're leaving this session today, remember that leaning not on your own understanding is a physical act of quantum trust. Just you're stepping out of the linear sequence of human stress into the divine flow where the end has already been declared from the beginning. So, in conclusion, okay, again, you're looking at the divine convergence of time and spirit. You're looking at each one of those. And I'd encourage you to go back and look at the slides, and you can see how each one of these is touching on it in a different aspect. All three of them are coming together, though. All this is coming together. And again, the physical, the human, all of these come together. Oh, okay. So as we're looking at this, we're looking at the different theories. The ones that I talked about the most, I've had several, but the main ones, if you're wanting to do any research, I would go into quantum microtubulars, biophoton signaling, and the photobiomodulations. Those are going to show you about how we talk about it, how the light has such an impact on us, and what light, it shows you what light really means, and who is our light. We know who our light is. So that's how important everything in our being requires the light. In science, you are a quantum receiver. Now, in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, we lean not unto our own understanding. We need to go to the light. So we've been looking at the world through several lenses today. We've looked at the pillar of light, the heart, where you have the relationship and devotion, where we do things for the glory of God, and the pillar of structure, which we talked about in the temple, which is how the light and the biophotons and the quantum entrapment actually work. And we talked about in the temple, there was the middle way, where you aren't just a spectator in a pre-written part. You're actually in the middle, and it's actually stabilizing them. We know that you are the light of the world, as we're taught that from the scriptures. So all of this goes back to, where is your focus? The scriptures told us that knowledge will increase in end times, and as early as 2026, we're seeing the physical proof of all these spiritual laws. Where's your focus? According to Kabbalah, your attention is a trigger. Where your attention is going to matter, according to Jewish tradition. And the observer effect in science, you're looking at the possibilities in one reality. You're seeing how all of this, you can, if you don't have the right focus where your light is, it's going to be off. And science is actually starting to go more into the study about incorrect light and things like that. So you're going to see more of this. So think about this. You are a vessel of light. From the 40 hertz gamma waves cleansing your brains to the photons binding your thoughts. You see in scriptures that our bodies are temples and we are light. We are to be the light to the world because we emanate light. This is what the science and the Jewish beliefs are showing us. We are a temple that will process to release the light to the world, the Insaf. And we know in Isaiah 61, arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you. So as Christians, we know we have to turn our hearts and minds to the Lord. And the Proverbs, lean not on your own understanding, is so important. By observing not our understanding, we are actually practicing the highest form of quantum observation. So when you are focusing on God, you're actually proving science. When we lean not into our understanding, we are intentionally stepping out of our limited three-dimensional logic and aligning ourselves with the infinite light, which is the Jewish belief. So in scientific terms, this is a moment where we stop trying to force the waves that are coming off of light to the infinite possibilities and collapse into our own, where we don't collapse into our own fearful expectations. We are focusing on the Lord. So what I'm saying is science and Kabbalah are proving what the scriptures already told us. We need to focus on the source of our light. We have to keep our focus on the Lord. That is so important. What's also really cool is that if the word about God, the presence of God is nefesh, the soul, and the core of that is fire, is the word fire. So we see how fire is often representing the Holy Spirit, and the soul, we're made God's image. It's referring to God's image. In Jewish belief, the soul is God's image. That's what's made in God's image. So when you study the Torah or the Bible, you're aligning it with the modern science. It's what we know, focusing on the Lord. The other thing that I got from all this was that you need two or more witnesses. We've talked about that before, where you have to have two or more witnesses. Well, guess what? You have the Bible, you have the Jewish belief system, and now science has caught up to them. So even if you just take the Bible and science, you still have two witnesses. So we have mathematically proven Jesus is the Messiah recently, and now we're proving that your focus has to be on the Lord and leaning on Him. Science is now proving that you have to focus on the Lord. Great news. At the All-In Christian Church, we have many classes and free resources to help you focus on the Lord. That's what this is all about, focusing on the Lord. I know that was a lot of theory and concepts, but there's a lot of science coming out, and I think it's important to look at it. Take it at your own level. Take it whatever you felt led to go into this. I went into a little bit deeper, but you don't have to. Wherever the Lord leads you is what I would tell you. But the biggest thing of all is focusing on the Lord. Isn't it amazing? We're even seeing in science that focusing how the light is so important. And from scriptures, we know what the light is. It all ties together, and that's so beautiful. So we're almost to the end of the Counting the Omar series, and next week we're going to be looking at Jesus. There's a lot of myths about him, and there's a lot of things that we do that we shouldn't be doing because we've already proven that he's the Messiah. And then the last week we'll be going into the full circle. Shavuot and Pentecost are on the same. Pentecost happened on Shavuot, so we will be looking at the fulfillment of the covenant. I also recently had a question brought to me, and so after a Shavuot in a few weeks, we're going to be looking at death and dying again and going in a little bit more on Jewish beliefs. So I hope you stay with me for all of that. I'm going to first open it up to the elders to see if they have any things about what do they think about the light and how science is now looking at light. Don't think we have a lot of elders on today.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
This was so good. So many different pieces. But the the focus on the Lord, talking about even the light. He is the light. He is everything that we need to be paying attention to, and the different structures that you brought forth within the tree of life. I'm gonna go back over this and look more into it myself. but it's what I love is pointing everyone to Jesus. It's like for years, they've been trying to prove he does not exist. But now there's scientific proof he does exist. And this is so good the way you brought this forth. And I really just, the light that keeps resonating with me. He is the light, and as we focus on him, then we die to our flesh and we take on more of him, the likeness of him. But yeah, that light. And it's unfortunate, as you were saying, how some people use the things incorrectly. But thank you so much for showing us how we should look at this the correct way. Thank you.
Well, and I'm getting some comments about that it's like coming out of a PhD lecture room. Well, try reading this for the first time. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, wow, going through some of this is just amazing. But the reason I think the Lord brought this forth is because, it's so interesting that I have been reading about more and more scientists who are actually, when they're trying to disprove God or they start looking at these different things, it's actually, I've read that it's actually bringing more people to God. It's taking them one way or the other. And it's because when you start looking at this, wow, this actually is mentioned in the Bible. This is actually mentioned in the Bible. God knew all of this. God created science. And there are many different levels you can take it to. I'm just giving you a really quick less than 1 hour overview of all of this, but there are so many different things that are coming out that keep proving God. It reminds me of Pharaoh. And also the Pharisees, but Pharaoh in particular. So you have Pharaoh who all this science was coming in, hitting him smack in the face and saying, this is God doing this. And he said no. And he said no, and he hardened his heart. So I think it's so amazing the times we're living in that we're getting to see even science is aligning all the things that were supposedly separate from God. Science was always separate. It was not part of God. But guess what? Science is proving who God is. And it reminds me about the scriptures that even the rocks will cry out. Everything is crying out who God is. But you can harden your heart and not listen to it. But what's fascinating is all of that is even proving beyond a doubt who it is, that God is who he is. Yeah. So the comment D about fascinating that prayer, worship, speaking in tongues are so good for us and strengthen us in so many ways. They do. It does strengthen you in many ways. It is amazing how it does it. It's a lot of cool things with science and medicine that have been coming out. So I would encourage you, you can kind of look around as the Lord leads you to look around at these things. But I hope the scratching of this, I knew it sounded really deep, trust me. I was trying, but it's a lot of deepness, but there is so much there. And again, do it as the Lord leads you. As the Lord leads you, and like for me, I've kept feeling like I need to dig into this deeper. I need to look at this a little bit more. This is interesting. So yeah, but the light is so vital. Deborah, to see how vital Jesus is the light we hold on to and focus on you. Yeah. All right. Anybody have any comments or questions before we end for the day? Next week won't be as deep, I promise. It won't be quite that level. It won't be a science class. I promise it won't be a science class. How that? Marion, go ahead.
Yeah, Gail, this is really beautiful. All I could say was wow. This is so amazing, and I have really enjoyed this information. It was like a couple of weeks ago, I was studying First John, uh, 1 and 5, and it was saying that God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. And as I was studying it, it was talking about the purity of God and the truth that comes out of him, and then he will not tolerate sin, evil, deception, and then in that it was also I was also seeing where even approaching him, he is light, and that darkness can't even come near him, that evil, whatever it is that's out there, because he is a holy God. And so that light that you were talking about just really put a great essence on even approaching him. So this was really good to me. Thank you very much. Eye opening.
Well, like I said, the Lord has really been opening the different levels to it. And like I said, for me, I have a medical background and a science background, and I started looking at it in different ways. And so, like I said, we looked at the mathematical, which is really actually my strong suit, but we looked at the mathematical aspect of all of this. And it's just so amazing to me, the timing. And like I said, all of these theories that most of the theories I was talking about today, most of them came out late last year or early this year. And there's a lot of the clinical trials that are going on right now. This is very relevant information for our day and age about things that are happening. It's fascinating to me how many things are coming out so quickly. And it goes back to, you can use the words, you can use anything for good or you can use it for evil. I am sure there will be some things that are used incorrectly. On the Kabbalah or Kabbalah, however you want to pronounce it, on that, I'm going to say it again, that there is always a belief that only a few people could get to it because it takes a lot of studying to get to it. I have not personally dived super deep into it. I actually didn't feel led to get into it until recently because I didn't feel like I was ready for it. You can see where it goes into a lot of deepness, and you have to have discernment because I've told the story before, and I can't think of all of the rabbis' names, but there were 4 rabbis that go into a cave. And I think that's 10 years, if I remember right, that they go in and devote time just to study this, to really get into the deep and to get to the sod level, the highest level. And when they did, one of them becomes a heretic, one of them commits suicide, one of them is kind of on the fence kind of thing. Doesn't have a good ending. And then there's only one that becomes a famous rabbi. And it's because, where is your focus? When you get into this, if you're looking at it from the science perspective, you're going to miss it. If you're looking at from asking God, how does this, what is our focus on? It just really shows you, all of this really shows you and hones in deep, where is your focus? And I think that was what I would take from this whole series we've been doing. Where is your focus? Because you can miss things otherwise, and you become a hardened heart. You can look at those and totally miss it. And I would just encourage you to pray about it and ask the Lord if there's some area you want to look at it more. But there's a lot more. I just literally scratched on the surface of the science and all of these things. So you're going to have to ask the Lord how much you want to get into each one of those if you want to. But I hope this was helpful. And as I said, next week it's going to be a little bit different take on it, because next week we're actually looking at Jesus. And I've heard so many people that have used the name of Jesus in vain. I have seen so many different, I mentioned before that I've seen movies. I've never watched them, but I've seen the advertisements for different things about how we don't actually align with Jesus. Who is he really? And he is God, and we need to know that. Okay, so that's what I had for today. I'm going to have any last questions? I didn't see any new ones. Okay, I think we're good. All right, well, let's end in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing us to come to learn about you and to worship you. And we praise you, we honor you. And today we learned about how important is the light. How important is our focus on you. We need to have our focus on the true source of life, which is you. Source of life, too. We need to have our focus on you and only you. And today, even science was showing us that where our focus is so important. And we thank you for that. We want to be holy and completely aligned with you. And if we formed any soul ties together, we ask you to remove those using the sword of the Spirit. Remove all the ties to each other so that we focus only on you. Our focus is on you. In your precious, precious name. Amen. Shalom, everyone. I hope to see you throughout the week. And again, it's Sabbath services. And like I said, next week we're going to be looking at the truth of Jesus. Bye, everyone.